Knowledge of the physical environment is essential to an LEO in patrol. It is one reason why seniority counts for a great deal in this line of work. The longer you work a given jurisdiction, the better you know it, and locals who become police officers quickly learn that growing up in an area does not mean that you truly know it. Part of it is that an LEO, unlike most people, has no perception of private or personal space. We can go anywhere given correct circumstances, and because of that, a great deal of idle time or routine patrol is spent exploring. Can you get a patrol car through the gap in this fence? Where does that track lead? Is there a way to get from this parking lot to another? If you walk this easement or power line access, what will you say? This is essential, because at some point this knowledge can mean shaving 30 seconds off a response time, or catching a fleeing subject. In every police jurisdiction of any size, in my experience, there is always at least one strange place. Not the spots you take rookies and play find the mud hole, or the crime scenes you use to scare explorers, but the real thing. The places that nobody talks about much. The places you don't find out about until you have to go there. The places you only go to if you have to. We have a place that is sometimes called the Patch. It's about 35 acres of very broken ground covered in scrub oak on the edge of town, completely isolated from everywhere else, out beyond an old brick plant that now makes clay pots. Nothing, as far as I can tell, has ever been built there, nor is it really good for anything. It's at the base of the tall ridge that currently marks the west boundary of our burg, cut by numerous gullies, and whose red clay soil is about useless for growing anything. The city seized it for taxes back in 1932 from a land company. It was listed as wasteland, no commercial use back then. It's really a strange place. I've been on search teams across it 6 times in 11 years, and every time I've been on it, it creeps me out. It gave me the willies when I first explored it, shortly after being cut loose on my own. You can't get a car very deep into it, and frankly, a short walk on foot into it gave me such a bad feeling I never went back without a reason. It wasn't until about 18 months later that I learned that I was not alone in my reaction to the place. One factual thing that bothers me about the place is that I get lost in it. I have, since I was old enough to think about such things, an unerring instinct about the direction north. I can always find it. Nighttime, snowstorms, forest, whatever. Give me a few seconds to concentrate, and I know which direction north is. Even the desert, which screws many people up, never bothered me, and the army taught me land nav to a fine degree. I've run compass courses with multiple doglegs and hit my target location every time, even on featureless terrain such as Fort Hood, where one bit of scrub is identical to every other bit. But every time I've been on the patch, I've gotten turned around, in broad daylight, with a ridgeline a quarter mile away that is only a couple degrees off a true north-south axis. After the first search, I started taking a compass with me. Near the center of the patch is a structure we call the Playhouse. It's a building made out of sheets of old galvanized tin, nailed to thick posts, and 4x4s with a dirt floor. We call it the Playhouse because there is absolutely no rationale for its positioning or design. Firstly, you can't get a vehicle larger than an ATV or dirt bike to it due to washouts and gullies. Maybe a jacked up 4x4 if it was dry and you really did not care about your paint job. Secondly, because the place is big, about 3,000 square feet as near as we can tell, but has no purpose. There is no animal pens near it, nothing. Just a wood framework with tin nailed to it. No tower on the roof seams, no doors, but several doorway-sized openings. No windows at all. Inside, it's split into at least a dozen rooms by either more tin sheets or partitions made out of old packing crates from the railroad. Some of the rooms are completely isolated from the exterior walls. There is no logic or reason to how some of the rooms are laid out. Several have openings that are barely 3 feet high. It reminds you of how kids put together a fort or treehouse, except that this one has cut down telephone poles for roof supports set several feet into the ground. Whatever else you can say about it, someone built it to last. There is no junk or litter about the Playhouse, and no graffiti. While it's not very obvious, it's been there since before the city seized the place, and with all the generations of kids, you would expect some beer drinking, ghost hunting, or general spray can antics. Nor is there any sign of animals taking advantage of the shelter, nor have I ever seen any birds' nests, although hornets' nests and mud daubers are present. and it smells odd. That's all I can say about it. It smells different than what I think it should. This has been commented on by others as well. No specific odor, just odd. And flashlights fail in it. Yes, flashlights fail everywhere, but flashlights seem to fail a lot more in it than anywhere else. $70 Streamlight Stingers that are city issue and have reliable rechargeable batteries go abruptly dead in there. And not in the usual fashion, the light going yellow for 20 minutes, getting dimmer and dimmer until they just fade away. Rather, going from hard white light to dead in a minute span. When you carry the same light every day for years, you know its battery in detail. Yet, many of us have been caught by an unexpected dead battery in the Playhouse. Sometime in the past, we were searching for a missing girl. It was likely that she had been carried off by a recent high water after massive cloudburst, 10 inches in 10 hours. But foul play was also a possibility for reasons best unrelated. A search was mounted. I was tasked with taking 2 officers and checking the area around the old brick plant and the patch. I had 2 veteran officers, both entry team members and well known to me. We'll call them MD and Flash. They readily accepted my suggestion that we change into tactical gear in order to protect our uniforms from the brush. To be frank, I was less concerned with the brush than for having an excuse to bring my MP5 along. I was not alone in that. As unbidden, both Flash and MD got their shotguns out of the arms room. Flash had a 14-inch pump, and MD a Benelli semi-auto. We searched the patch first, and although all 3 of us were carefully keeping track of where we were in a place we had all been in before, we managed to get well and truly turned around twice in the space of 90 minutes. It took us a lot longer than it should have to search the area, because frankly, we were not splitting up, at all. Anywhere else, we would have been 20 to 30 feet apart, walking on line. Here, we stuck together. We had been on other search teams which had gotten hopelessly jumbled and separated in the patch before. It was late afternoon when we went to the Playhouse. The sky was completely overcast, the color of lead. The ground was muddy, everything was wet, and there was a cold breeze out of the north. To say it was a miserable day was an understatement. We circled the Playhouse, looking for footprints, and found nothing. However, drainage was such that it was possible that they could have been washed away, so a search was necessary. Inside, there were no gaps in the ceiling to speak of, and very few in the walls. The grey daylight hardly made its presence known through what gaps there were, although the dull light through nail holes made you think unpleasantly of animal eyes in the night. I led the way in. 20 feet in, a portable metal detector, a wand type used to check for weapons that Flash was carrying, suddenly started beeping, and did not stop until he pulled the battery pack out. He swore it had been turned off the whole time he had been out. Later, at the PD, it worked perfectly. We were clearing the place like a hostile building, rather than a search. We had not talked about it, but all 3 of us were on edge. Very much so. The place smelled very wrong. Not a smell of anything in particular, just not the way a place should smell. I can't explain it in any way better than that. I was on one knee, checking out a closet-sized room, when abruptly, the light on my MP5 died, going from white and bright to dead in a couple of seconds. Flash took point in MD's center, while I tagged along and switched batteries. I had a couple full-charge spares on me, as well as 2 more flashlights and some Sialooms. A minute or so later, Flash's light died the same way, and he dropped to the rear to change out, while MD and I moved up a place. We stopped at that point, and we heard something. Flash muttered, "What was that?" and we all listened carefully. It was coming from ahead and to our right. We did not speak at the time, of course, but later, we never agree on what it sounded like. To me, it sounded like a sick cat might sound as it whimpers. We moved forward towards the noise, and came to a largish room which had the exterior wall on one side. MD made entry, and at that exact moment, his flashlight died. He immediately sidestepped and dropped to one knee. I moved in and past him along the wall as Flash slid along the wall on the opposite side of the doorway. Flash was to the left of the doorway, MD was right, kneeling, and I was about 2 feet to MD's right. The room was about 20 by 11, with us at the narrow side, and something moved in the far right corner. Flash hit it with his light a second before I did. I remember MD yelling, and then both fired. To this day, I swear I saw a big, dark dog, large, 150 plus pounds, bull mastiff sized, in Flash's light, moving fast. I fired, 3-round burst, and then kept firing as MD and Flash pounded away. Both went empty and yelled that they were withdrawing, team procedure, and I fired to cover them as I backed out last. After the first burst, I could not see much for the muzzle flash, so I just ripped up the corner with 3-round bursts. I fired off the full 30-round mag. In retrospect, I cannot explain why I fired 30 rounds at a dog. There was no valid reason to simply hose it down, nor for Flash and MD to blaze away like we had. Nerves is the only explanation that I can offer. All I can say is that encounter was quite simply the most stressful incident I have ever had, bar none. In the second room, we reloaded and MD switched out batteries. Then we re-entered the long room. There was no dog, no body, no blood, zip. None of us described what we saw the same way. Flash was extremely reluctant to describe what he saw at all. But there are a couple facts. All three saw a target in motion. Despite the fact that we all perceived it as being in motion, we all saw it in a corner and never shifted our point of aim, despite the fact that we all train regularly on moving targets. MD and Flash were hunters. I shoot lots of moving varmints. I served in military actions, and both Flash and I had been in fatal police shootings, and we had 12 gauge 3-inch magnum holes and 30 expended 9mm brass. 30 bullets and 108 pellets were fired at a specific area. In this case, an area consisting of dirt floor and tin walls. All three of us were classified as expert shots. No matter how closely we, nor the 2 investigators who came out later, looked, we could find no hits on the floor, and only 23 projectile penetrations in the tin walls out of 138 projectiles fired. Triple aught pellets are 0.36 inches in diameter steel balls. 9mm bullets are roughly 0.38. 105 remain unaccounted for. The 23 holes we found were concentrated in the target corner, 9 to the left, 14 to the right of the corner, with the 2 groups 22 inches apart at the closest, as if something solid between the 2 groups had soaked up the missing rounds. The department wrote the incident off as accidental discharge. The girl was eventually found elsewhere. Flash, MD, and I never really talked about the incident, except indirectly. All 3 admitted having felt more stress than before or since. None of the 3 of us have been to the patch since. Both MD and Flash have moved on to other agencies for unrelated reasons. One of the creepier things from later on, when we try to explain the whole matter, and a firefight is not a joking matter to the police, no matter that no one got hurt. The administration members we were dealing with, who have been LEOs there for 40 plus and 30 plus years respectively, nodded, asked a few questions, and let the matter drop. That is all there is to it. The chemical angle has some merits. During World War II, our county hosted one of the largest training facilities in the USA, and chemical weapons, mostly mustard gas, were tested and deployed here. Numerous chemical core units were formed and trained here. The EPA for local government would be more frightening than a breach in the time-space continuum and hounds of tinderlers pouring through. One point, the place did not smell bad, but rather, it did not smell the way such places usually do. Of course, there were no animals living there, so the rotting feces scent and various musks were absent, which could be it. Chemicals or spills could account for animals not liking the place. Fumes could also account for why I got lost and why we felt uneasy. It could also explain why it was built so solidly. Certain fumes also disrupt electrical connections. I recall from Army NBC training by causing minute surface contamination of the connectors. Come to think of it, we never retested the batteries once outside. We just put them in chargers, and the spring-loaded charger connections are intended to clean the battery terminals. And, of course, for the military, no site is remote. And back during World War II, access to that area was much easier. Another thing, back in those days, there was no EPA. You dumped stuff wherever you felt like it. Lots of possibilities, You know, it's all getting pretty simple for me. The design of the party house makes perfect sense. A solidly built structure with no doors, no window openings, and an implausible interior layout. A gas chamber. A place where you run troops in, wearing chemical gear, to be exposed to tear gas or other weapons in order to learn that their gear works and how to function while wearing it. Residual chemicals would drive off animals. Chemical fumes could account for a sense of disorientation and discomfort. They trained here from 1949 to 1945, very intensively, up to 100,000 troops at any one time. That would account for the wrong way the place smelled. Damn, I debunked my own experience. Another thought that has occurred to me since the whole chemical thing is that we were firing into a corner. It's possible that the first hits forced the tin sheets back from their supports, creating an opening. Firing in the dark, as I noted, means that after the first shot or burst, your night vision is gone, and we were using flashlights anyway. The weak sunlight would not have been easily noticed, nor was it a lengthy undertaking. Flash had 5 shots to pump out, MD 7 semis, me 10 3-round bursts. It would have come out as a continuous volley in the space of seconds. If that happened, the bulk of the rounds could have passed through the gap. When the shooting stopped, the sheet sagged closed again. Given the ear-numbing effects of shooting in an enclosed space, we would not have heard anything. If I recall correctly, the missing rounds were at the apex of the corner, where the inside wall sheet of tin met an exterior sheet of tin. We did walk around the outside of the building to make sure no rounds had hit anyone. Tin sheets do not stop anything, but I do not recall specifically locating the exit points, especially since we were waiting for investigators. You don't screw with the scene of a shooting, regardless if you hit anything or not. Besides, at the angle we were firing, the rounds would have gone some distance before hitting ground. If the investigators made the same assumption that we did, that the sheets were firmly fixed, it could explain the whole matter. Then and now, chemical warfare specialists are routinely exposed to a full range of chemical weapons while in full chemical gear. This is done to get them used to hostile environments, to teach them that their gear works, and the like. The US uses weaker than normal chemicals, but for example, between 1980 to 1989, 14 US servicemen died in such training exercises. The USSR routinely expected 1% losses when training with chemical weapons. Of course, any training exercise can cause deaths. At one summer AT, the 49th Armored, TXNJ, had 11 training deaths in a 2-week period. Aviation units always lose people to crashes, and vehicle accidents always take a toll as well. The place was definitely not set up in a manner of defensive works, however, not even as simulated works. The military camp near our burg trained a lot of chemical corps units during World War II. The net and some of my own books has given me a lengthy list and confirmed the fact that there was training with live chemical weapons. I've emailed some of the unit veterans associations, but I'm pretty confident the whole matter has a logical explanation. Frankly, it has turned my opinion around 180 degrees. While before I was fairly uneasy about the whole experience, I'm inclined now to think that the whole business was probably a touch of fumes and a lot of charged imagination. The Playhouse is no more. I did some net research, and it turns out that there was a lot of chemical warfare training done in our area. I brought my findings to the city, and they shrugged it off, but they did accept the hard copies. A couple weeks later, without any fanfare, the city reopened the accessway, punched a road in, tore down the Playhouse, and ripped the whole area up. They dug a massive hole in the middle, which was then leased to a local factory for disposing of ceramic debris. A further update: the patch is stripped of vegetation, other than grass and low brush. It's pretty flat, as the dumping, digging, and filling has leveled it all out, although it's probably several feet higher on the average. They've built a warehouse on one edge, and survey crews have marked it all out. With the boom that's hit our burg, it will probably be a mall or something in the next few years. It's smaller now. The city sold it, and a factory complex lopped off about 1/6, and most of the rest is fenced, since the dirt they used to cover the shards is better than the old red dirt, and they graze some horses there. They put a major water main through it recently, and I expect it to be built up within a year or two, given the city growth. I walked across it a couple of times for various reasons. It's nothing unusual anymore, just open field. No getting lost, no battery failure, no feel to it at all. Zip. Maybe toilet shards act as interdimensional insulation. One more point to support my chemical theory. When they dug the holes, they hauled the dirt off. The dirt used for cover and raising the ground level was trucked in. Very unusual. The red dirt they hauled off has not shown up at any of the city's various sites, including the huge dump complex, nor was it sold as fill. The only creepy thing remaining, I asked one of the investigators if they checked the tin walls to see if they were loose. They had checked. The tin was not loose. I said, that's odd. He said, not for that place, and ended it there. In the summer of 1970, I had just finished 5th grade and was enjoying my vacation. I live in the city of Zhytomyr, Ukraine. One day, my friend and I went out to play in the yard. As we turned the corner of the house and passed by the bushes, we spotted something strange. We picked it up, and it looked like a green pistol, but only in a very general sense. The handle resembled a pistol's, with grips on the sides, but there was no sign of a clip fitting underneath. The trigger and guard were ordinary, but everything else was baffling. The barrel was slightly over 20 centimeters long, with a diameter of about 5 centimeters. The walls of the barrel were incredibly thin, around 1 millimeter thick, and along its length, there were external, ring-like grooves, about 2 millimeters in height, spaced roughly 6 centimeters apart. Above the barrel, near the handle, was a sighting bar, like those on rifles, which seemed completely out of place for a pistol. The whole object was a strange shade of green, though the appearance of the object was confusing, and its purpose completely mysterious. The strangest part was not the object itself. It was how my friend and I reacted after we picked it up. We were both 5th graders, and logically, we should have examined the object, studied it closely, or even tried to disassemble it. But we did not do any of that. Instead, we did not even bother to look down the barrel, which was huge. We simply glanced inside and saw a sooty coating along the walls. Without a second thought, we quickly went to the yard, gathered some boards, and built a small fire. We tossed the pistol into the flames. After a few minutes, the green paint started to bubble. Then, to our surprise, the pistol began to shrink. It did not melt or lose its shape. It just got smaller, reducing in size by half. Once it had shrunk, we turned our backs on the fire, and, without waiting any longer, walked briskly out of the yard and headed home. This whole event took less than 10 minutes. Years passed, and whenever I was on business trips with colleagues or having a drink, I would often tell the story of the strange object I had found as a child. Then, one day, many years later, my daughter brought home a book by the writer Uspensky, titled Children's Horror Stories from a Friend. I read it too, and I was astonished by what I found. In the preface, Uspensky mentioned that the stories in the book were based on accounts from Soviet pioneers who had attended Pionierskaya Zorka in the late 60s and early 70s. The children had sent in their stories, and among them were several about the green pistol. According to these stories, only those children who had acted almost exactly as I had, burning the pistol in the fire, watching it shrink, and then not investigating what happened afterward, were able to survive and write about it. What stands out to me about this experience is that this object was of unknown origin and purpose. When heated, it shrank by half, without changing shape. What's even stranger is that 2 5th-grade boys, when faced with such a bizarre object, did not try to take it apart or examine it closely. Instead, we immediately built a fire and burned it, showing no curiosity about what might happen afterward. At the same time, similar objects were reported by children of the same age in different regions of our country during that period. I was a dancer for 13 years and used to travel around Western Canada. I was working in a town called Williams Lake with a friend. I was on stage Monday afternoon doing my first show when I noticed a guy sitting in a booth back a little from the stage. I don't think I will do this description justice, but he was gorgeous. I mean, Botticelli angel, move over Brad Pitt gorgeous. Blonde curls and intense blue eyes. In my entire dancing career, I was always in a long-term relationship and never stepped outside of it. I was never even tempted, but this man was everything I found tempting in one package. He threw some money onto the stage, and I gave him a poster. After my show, I went over to sign it. Because it was a booth, I slipped in beside him and started signing the poster when he looked at me incensed and said, "What do you think of me?" I turned to face him fully, and it was like my veins were suddenly full of ice water. I could feel almost an instant cord develop between us and all of my energy being pulled through it. The worst, though, was being this close. I was able to look deep into his blue eyes, and there was nothing there. I mean nothing. No soul. They were empty and terrifying. I remember I stuttered in fear when I answered him. "Honestly, you terrify me. You are cold, and I am looking into your eyes, and I don't see a soul. I am not even sure you are a human being." He was looking at me with those terrible, empty eyes when he said, "I am trying to learn to be human." That actually is when it gets worse. As soon as he said that, I was thrust into a vision. As in, I was no longer seeing the bar or him. Instead, I was looking down at what appeared to be my hands, except they were strong, square hands that belonged to a man, and those hands / my hands were choking the life out of people while I looked in their eyes. The faces kept changing under my hands, and I can still remember some of them to this day. There, the vision ended, and I was still sitting in the booth with this man, and he was staring at me so intensely that I am certain he knew what I had seen. I mumbled out, "I can't help you with that," in response to his earlier comment about trying to learn to be human, and got up shakily from the table. My friend came over and asked if I was okay, because I must have been as white as a sheet. I muttered I was okay, but shaken, and she commented that he really spooked her, and she had only spoken to him briefly, but he scared her. We were there, working for the week. He came in Tuesday and Wednesday, but never spoke to either of us again, just sat and stared. I can't say for sure what this man was, only that he most definitely wasn't a man as in human. In my years, I have sadly met some of the worst in society, killers and child predators. These people are evil and twisted, but even so, when you look them in the eyes, there is a spark of something that shows that they are human. Whatever we encountered in Williams Lake was missing this. B20, 2 years ago. Go out with GF for dinner and then drinks. Walk out of pub at about 2 a.m. Winter, cold fucking wind, nobody but us. Begin walking her home. She lives nearby, maybe a 10 or 15 minute walk. As we pass by a small street, I feel myself get snatched away. Get hit several times by blunt object. Try to understand what's going on. Hard to see with blood in my eyes. 2 guys are holding me and taking my fangs. Hear GF scream. I turn towards screams and a guy is holding her against a wall, touching her. Manage to free one hand, punch one of the guys holding me. He moves backwards, holding his face. Quickly get away from the other guy holding me, and start to run towards the fucker holding my GF against the wall. Get hit in the back of the head. You got knocked the fuck out. .jpg. Wake up in an ambulance, GF sitting in the back, holding my hand. There was a police car nearby that heard the screams. They arrived just seconds after I got knocked out. GF unharmed, and I got my things back. I'll take a too spooky from me ghost any day. True fear is a loved one screaming for help when you can't do anything about it. We are still together.